Hey everybody, welcome to West Basin. I'm going to call this meeting to order. It is Wednesday, April 5th, and this is a meeting of a special meeting of the Board of Directors and our Metropolitan Water District Representatives Caucus. So first of all, welcome everyone who's here. I'll go ahead and ask our staff to determine if we have a quorum.
Absolutely, President Houston. We'll start with President Deere. Director Deere.
Here.
I'm looking at immediate past president and Director Deere. Here. Here. Director Williams. Here. Director Gray.
Here.
Director Alvarez. And President Houston.
Here. All right, we have a quorum. Now it's time for public comment. Anyone from the public who wishes to speak at this time?
Okay, and we'll start with the room here. If there's any members of the public who'd like to make a public comment, seeing no hands raised, I'll just like to thank all of our guests for being with us here in person. But I'll now turn my attention to the online platform to recognize anyone who'd like to make a public comment by raising their hand. But seeing no hand raised, it seems we have no public comments at this time, President Houston.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so next we will go to item 4, which is discussion items. And so it looks like we have 3 underneath that. So if we go ahead, Greg, we'll start with 4A.
Okay, and we have our first item, which will be an update on the water supply conditions and conservation messaging. And that'll be delivered by Sue Sims, Group Manager of External Affairs at Metropolitan Water District. So please,
Great.
Sue, take it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and thank you, President Houston and directors and staff. It's great to be able to be with you. I appreciate you accommodating us being in a hybrid format. We had some activities here at headquarters that both Lana Haddad and I needed to be at, so appreciate that. But did want to take a chance to fill you in on some of our water conservation advertising that we are doing and will be doing. Obviously, our goal is to raise awareness about the importance of water conservation, which is always a little more challenging in a wet year, and to talk about rebate programs and our partnerships with agencies like yours. Next slide. Or would you like? Okay, so this is obviously the question everyone's asking. How can we still be in a drought with all this rain and all this snow? And as I say, perhaps one of the toughest questions to answer, because some parts of our state actually are in a drought. Here in Southern California, I think I saw just within the last hour or two a news story that said we're not, but some of the same themes need to continue. So if you'll move to slide 3. Our challenge really is to remain credible as we're talking about this. We had an event last week out at Diamond Valley Lake, the day we were putting water back into the lake for the first time in 3 years. In addition to our general manager, Adel Haj Khalil, and directors, Vice Chair Repenning and Director Armstrong, we had a couple of state officials, most notably California Natural Resources Secretary Wade Crowfoot and Ted Craddock, who runs the State Water Project for DWR. Great event. Probably saw some of the coverage on that. And a good way, again, to leverage our earned media to get a lot of attention on the story, both the water supply and the conservation. Next slide. So, and I will say the messaging that we've done, the messaging that we're using, your agency and other agencies were extremely helpful in helping us refine these messages, and really comes down to these as the foundation, that water conservation has to continue to be a way of life for all of us in Southern California, despite the year type, and that our agencies have tools, have rebates, have grants, have classes. I know West Basin does rain barrel programs that have been very successful, as well as lots of tips and ways to help on bewaterwise.com and on your own website. Next slide. And from that, we developed this this matrix that we're using in a lot of our work with media. I won't read the whole thing, but essentially articulating those themes, talking about how, because this weather whiplash that we have from wet to dry year to year, and really unpredictable, and requires us to invest in our water systems and to manage them in a way. We're in, as I'm sure you know, a very unique situation in Southern California, where we've got these abundant supplies from Northern California, and yet the other main lifeline of imported water for us, the Colorado River, is despite maybe a little bit of relief this year, in some long-term issues. So again, our message is going to continue to be the importance of us all conserving. Next slide. In January, we made a conscious decision to hold off on our paid advertising campaign. We knew that with the weather and with all the stories about the rain, that we didn't want to be wasting any of our paid advertising campaign when we were getting so much free media. So our campaign actually just started this week. I'll talk a little bit about that, but we were able to do a number of press events and pitch a lot of news stories that ended up with about 200 news stories that we counted between beginning of January and the end of February. Our media monitoring puts a value on that of about $3 million if we had to pay for advertising to do that. So a great value for us. And as you'll see by the number below, 120 visitors went from our social media platforms to bewaterwise.com. We also put together some additional fact sheets. Again, we've distributed these to your staff and are continuing to develop those on Colorado in particular. That became a big question for a lot of people when there were some stories in February on the 6th state proposal and California's proposal. So working on that, and we're going to be stepping that up in the next couple of weeks as the federal government comes out with their environmental impact study, looking forward for the Colorado River. And then some fun activities, which we always love. The Angel City Football Club, we are sponsoring them this year along with the state Save Our Water, and out, as we always are, at a lot of exhibit booths and community events, Earth Day events. Next slide.
Hey, Sue, before you jump to the next one, can I ask a question or two real quick?
Sure, of course.
Real fast, because I see on the left the statistics. So 120,000 visitors went to the website from social media. How does that compare to the past? Is that a lot more people? Was there another time you had that type of volume?
If I recall, and I can confirm this with you, that in the previous similar time frame, we were under 70,000. So a pretty dramatic increase that we're able to track. And I'm sure you're finding this too, that social media is becoming more and more the go-to place for people. And as you can create content that's everything from compelling to amusing, that helps drive that interest.
Very good, thank you. And then the other question on the right side, you mentioned so sponsoring and exhibit booths at community events, which West Basin does that a lot. There's differences of opinion sometimes on sponsorships, although the majority of our board really believes in sponsorships. It is what it is for us to be out in communities. So can you at least give us your perspective? Sponsorships. It is what it is. We have to find ways to get out in the community.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one we're actually looking at because we want to make sure that when we're sponsoring these events, we are getting the value of connecting with these groups, that we are not just, writing a check, having a luncheon and then going home. And we are trying to put together a more strategic approach. Some of these events are, very small dollars, and we'll actually have booths. We'll pass out information, whether it's at the for example, the Theater Pain Garden event that's coming up this weekend, or water festivals and things like that, where we're face to face and we're able to talk about either conservation programs or pure water recycling. Those we see the direct value. I think the bigger challenge for us are some of these larger sponsorships where I mean, to be honest, some of them we've done year after year, and really being able to step back and say, are these wise investments? Are they investments that benefit Metropolitan? Are we building strategic partnerships with these groups that they understand what our needs are and how we can work together? And that's really our goal in an effort that we're undergoing that's part of GM Haj Khalil's strategic plan, is to make sure we're doing that so that we can, answer that question that you asked about what are you getting for these investments. So I think we will have a lot more on that hopefully in the months to come. But it's a question that we want to make sure that we can truthfully and honestly answer, that we are getting our message out there through these sponsorships.
So thank you so much, Sue, for that feedback, because as you know, a lot of functions, they're not free. One way or the other, we have to pay something to participate. So we, of course, look at that on our side too at West Basin. And I think we're looking at it the same way strategically. What's the value of it? So I really, Metropolitan's perspective, and we'll definitely be watching what you all come up with as you rescope that. So thank you, and you
Good.
can go on to the next slide. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I mentioned some of our other activities that we're doing. The Colorado River, obviously a lot of attention on that. We've got a new fact sheet, because what we wanted to be able to say, the press coverage was, well, California's looking at this very differently than the other states. We want to be able to explain why, the tremendous benefit this program has for Southern California. Of course, we're fighting for California's interests. Of course, we want to preserve our investments in that. And so this is just one example of some of that work that we are doing. I mentioned the Angel Cities football club, and their opening game, I think, was maybe 2 weeks ago this Sunday. And I just got a video from them about an hour ago that touts the partnership that they have with us and Save Our Water. And it's a very modest partnership, but we've got in-stadium advertising, and we'll be partnering with some of their team members that have an interest in sustainability and conservation as the summer goes on. And then, of course, press conferences. This is one of our general manager at a landscape transformation program that we did. Next slide, please. So as we were saving money in January and February on paid advertising, our staff came up with a number, this is just a small example, but they had a number of these kind of double meaning digital ads that we used on social media, where there's a longer message and then it punctuates with the smaller message. Again, these were things that we could pivot day by day depending upon whether it was raining or what the conditions were, and just we got a lot of attention and a lot of eyes on these at virtually no dollars out of our pocket. Next slide. And I mentioned this week we kicked off our paid advertising campaign. These are some of the in-language ads that we're using on billboards, both digital and static, and on transit shelters. And this morning I got the proof of placement for those. There's a number, about 200 of them throughout the service area, and we'll be sharing where they are in each of the member agency regions starting this week. So we'll get those out. We've always done a couple of languages. This year we're doing 6 languages, as you'll see here, underscoring that message and again driving people to be water wise. Next slide. And then finally, I wanted to preview a couple of activities. Starting on this past Saturday, we're on, which I didn't realize was the world's largest digital billboard, right there on the reef at the corner, or at the intersection of the harbor and Santa Monica freeways. it's a rotating board, but obviously a big presence there. We're going to continue our collaboration with the state Save Our Water campaign. This is their new logo, which we the water bear, which we love very much. And they've got some state money that we're hoping to tap into for advertising here that will showcase either Be Water Wise or other branding, depending upon where in Southern California those ads are. We're getting ready to do a couple of a regional survey and then also some focus groups for message testing in the next month or two. We want to make sure that the languages that we're using and public attitudes toward everything from turf removal to water conservation to investments in infrastructure reflect where people are, especially given this very wet year, but also a lot of attention on weather and water. So we'll be doing that and sharing the results of that, the messages that resonate the best with your team there. One of our big success stories last year was with some pretty modest investments, a few $1,000s, bringing in social media influencers to reach groups that we had not reached as well before. We had, and I had never heard of this band, but the Lindas, which, my kids knew who they were, and a very young and rising group that did our campaign last year. We had the photographer for the LA Lakers who did a series, and then we've got a couple of people that we're in the process of filming now that we'll use. And just a really good way to reach a different audience and talk about sustainability and steps that people can take in their own homes and yards and businesses to save water. And then the bulk of the remaining part of our paid media campaign, I mentioned the outdoor and the digital. We're actually going back to television this year. Local KTLA and some local Spanish TV stations, we were able to negotiate a really cost-effective buy. And while a lot of people have cut cords and gone to streaming, there's still a significant population that watches local TV, and we wanted to make sure we weren't missing that. And then finally, this geofencing, which essentially when you walk into a Home Depot or Lowe's or Ace Hardware, it's a project where it will tell you about items in that store that are eligible for a water saving rebate. Things like appliances, things like the water monitors that you can put on your pipes. And we're going to test that out in a few areas and see if that's something that helps drive purchases and public awareness of the changes that people can make in their own homes. So that's that'll be a new program for us in the next couple of months. And I think that might be all of my slides. Is that the last one? Yeah. So that's what we're doing. We'll give a short report at Monday's committee meeting, focusing primarily on the DVL press conference that we had that I mentioned. Our press office just took a number of reporters out to the Colorado River yesterday and the day before to try and make sure that they understand that system and its importance to Southern California. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that, and then and then answering any questions that our committee or board has. So that does it kind of up to the moment for us, but I'd be happy to answer any other questions that anyone has before turning it over to Lana.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sue, very much for this report. I'll go ahead and open it up to questions between those who are in the room and or on the teams. So far, I don't see any hands, but anybody? I mean, I think this is really good. We're getting firsthand information from Metropolitan on the rescoping of messaging as we speak. So have questions or comments?
I was going to say, if anybody has anything they want to follow up with me on, I'm certainly, they can reach out anytime, and we're happy to provide additional information or detail on any of these elements.
Well, since everyone's being bashful, let me ask a question or two real quick. Well,
Okay.
one thing, what is your advertising budget? Could you say at the end, there's, it's obviously a lot of this is paid and you're being very conscious of it, but what is the advertising budget that Metropolitan has on all this?
So the board 2.5 years ago approved a $10.5 million 3-year budget. So $3.5 million a year. We I don't think we've quite spent that, but in terms of value, um, the added value we got certainly has been much bigger than that for the last 2 years, and that's what we're working on this year. But essentially 3.5 million is the budget that we're working with for the paid part of this advertising. And then the state, I believe in their current year budget, they've got 7 million with their Save Our Water advertising. What we're hoping to do is, we're half the state's population in Southern California. We'd certainly like to be able to get a big chunk of that for advertising down here as well. So that will be dollars that are not ours, but hopefully we can use to amplify our message.
Very good. Does anybody have questions or thoughts, or is anyone doing something, their own organization that's want to tell us about at all? Or I see Anatole here in the room.
I see former Councilman Dan Medina from Gardena here, and his Cinco de Mayo committee is having a festival, and I think we're going to have a booth there, are we?
The West Basin Water District has always had a booth at our Cinco de Mayo festival, and we've garnered about 3,500 people every time. So there's always been the presence of West Basin District's booth there. And one time you actually ran out of flyers.
Oh boy. I do not know if we have that on our roster right now, and that's coming up at the end of the month.
We're going to discuss that this afternoon.
Perfect. So we'll get on that. Thoughts, questions, comments? Anybody else on the line? You know what? The other thing is, well, quite frankly, Stu, I mean, this is so timely because, when I'm out and about all the time right now, people, that's what they're reading, that's what they're seeing on TV is just there's way too much water, there's going to be flooding, there's going to be all these new challenges all of a sudden. Plus, you guys had great visuals of refilling Diamond Valley Lake. So I do know it's going to be tricky how we make sure the messaging is really strong coming out of the next couple months into the summer. So I think it's very important that whatever talking points or what have you all develop, if you haven't already, please send it our way so that we can look at those.
Sure.
Because I'm getting these questions all the time right now from both elected people and just average residents. I think we can't let up on the gas at all on our messaging. So I think we're looking to you all for some help from your end.
Yeah, no, that's
one thing. Yeah. Well, one thing too is the Colorado River. So, we're doing well in California, but the Colorado River system, of course, is extremely strained. And I think the majority of folks don't realize how bad that is.
Yeah, I think that's part of our outreach that we want to be doing too, is to help people understand that while one of our systems is well filled this year, we've got another huge source of water for Southern California that is not doing nearly as well. I mean, it's amazing the difference that 1 year makes, and of course nobody knows what next year will be like. But I do. One of the things I hope we find in our focus groups and in our research is that people are becoming more aware of just these weather extremes. How the pendulum. It's not even sort of a gradual swing from one to the other. It's just sort of these drastic swings, and that as water agencies we have to be prepared on both extremes for it, and that requires both careful water management and planning, but also people to conserve in their own homes and their businesses and schools and communities. So we're hoping to be able to refine those messages even further once we do the focus groups and the surveys here in the next few weeks.
Very good. I don't see anybody else asking questions. So Sue, I think you're going to get off the hook on this.
All right.
Thank you so much for that.
Of
and
course.
What I would just ask, what I would ask our staff, we have a public information and education committee meeting later this month, and if you all would put on that agenda, at least an information item of some messaging that West Basin can talk to our directors about. I think that'll be really timely, so I'd ask that you guys can do that.
Absolutely, President.
All right, very good. Thank you, Sue. Yes.
Thank you, President
Medina.
Houston.
You're welcome. Dan Medina.
I just wanted to invite Metropolitan to come to our event, and we'd be more than happy to provide a booth for them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, let's get in touch and I will convey that to our staff.
Perfect. We will put you in touch. So thank you.
Great,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Dan, for that. All right, we'll move on to the next item, which is 4B as in boy. Looks like an update on AB 1572, Freedman Potable Water. So Greg, if you will go ahead and take us to that item.
Okay, well, I think you've just done the introduction, and we just need to introduce Lana Haddad, our Legislative Services Section Manager at MAC. So Lana, please provide your report. And thank you, Sue, for your presentation as well. Really informative. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today, President Houston, members of the board, General Manager Reed, staff, and also members of the public. So today we're going to be talking about AB 1572 by Assemblymember Freedman, which deals with the use of potable water to irrigate non-functional turf. So I'll be giving a quick overview on what the bill does, and then I'd like to talk about our board actions to address non-functional turf. Then I'll talk about our outreach efforts, and then also finally close up with sort of next steps of where we're planning on going with this particular item. So first of all, 1572 would prohibit the use of potable water for irrigation of non-functional turf located in commercial, industrial, and irrigation areas, municipal and multifamily residential properties by specified dates. It requires the State Water Resources Control Board to adopt regulations by January 1st of 2025, and also requires certifications of compliance and compliance audits that include certifications by the property owner by designation, and then the audits are conducted by visual inspections. There is an enforcement component to it, but local water agencies, it's not a shall, it's a may in the language, and agencies must add a prohibition to their water service agreements by January 1st of 2026. This requires reporting by local water agencies as determined by the State Water Resources Control Board, and local agencies must submit their information to support the compliance audits by the State Water Resources Control Board. And those compliance audits happen in 2 out of the 10 hydrologic regions in the state. So by the end of 5 years, you would have the entire state covered in terms of the audits. So our board has been very actively engaging on the topic of non-functional turf conversion and including a ban on new installation. So in August of 2022, the board at the One Water Committee considered and supported 4 different options to advance non-functional turf removal. It was an increase in incentives. We also put together a board resolution. There was conversation around a new water allocation methodology during the drought. And also state legislation was one of the options that the board at that point considered and supported. In October of 2022, the board adopted a resolution encouraging the reduction and elimination of irrigation for non-functional turf. In November of 22, and I think we alluded to it a little bit earlier, there was a 6-basin state proposed agreement that threatened 50% of California's Colorado River imported supplies. In response to that, Metropolitan and 13 of our member agencies signed on to a Colorado River letter committing to reducing non-functional turf by 30% in our service areas. In December of 2022, the board adopted the 2023 legislative priorities and principles. That document includes a priority for a Metropolitan-sponsored bill on the long-term conversion and banning of non-functional turf in new construction. For Metropolitan to sponsor or co-sponsor a bill, it requires explicit board action. In February of 2023, Assemblymember Freedman introduced her bill, and Metropolitan received a co-sponsorship request from the sponsors of the bill, which is the NRDC and Heal the Bay. Finally, in March of 2023, as a result of all of the board activity, staff began outreach efforts consistent with the board's direction that we'd been receiving for the past 8 months. So those outreach efforts, we wanted really, because this playing out at the retail level. We wanted to be really respectful of that. And so we convened a member agency non-functional turf work group. And so far we've had 2 meetings, one in March and one in April, with representation from nearly all of our member agencies. Additionally, we met with a number of individual agencies across the service area representing different areas and different sort of climates. We also presented this conversation at the member agency managers meeting, and we also had multiple meetings with the bill sponsors. The member agency managers and staff relayed concerns to us regarding the implementation and enforcement of the bill in sort of 3 different big buckets. So first was the administrative burden and liability. And what their concerns were really around reporting and enforcement, sort of a lack of flexibility and local control, a need for funding support, and assurances that any potential financial liabilities for penalties would be accrued to a violator and not to the water agency to protect compliant ratepayers. The possible amendments included things like clarifying the state water resources responsibility for certifications of compliance and shifting it and making sure it doesn't apply to the water agency, ensuring that penalties would accrue to violators, and then potential credits, waivers, or exemptions for agencies which already meet specified standards or invest in recycled water. The second sort of bucket of concern was just a lack of clarity in some of the language in the bill. And so there were, confusion around how do we define functional turf versus non-functional turf. There was a feeling that there was some potential for conflicting or ambiguous definitions in the enforcement and a lack of parity between private and public entities. And so to help address those, the member agencies shared with us that they would prefer to see a clearer definition of functional and non-functional turf to ensure accurate property owner designations of functional versus non-functional, and then also to provide clarity in the metrics to assist in their compliance. The last sort of big bucket of concerns had to do with regulatory timing and funding. And so the concerns were conflicts in development and implementation between this legislation and the long-term water efficiency framework. And then additionally, they also expressed a concern about the impacts of a lack of green space in certain underserved communities, particularly regarding the multifamily residential or municipal buildings without funding to support that conversion from turf to climate appropriate landscaping. And so the possible amendments to address those concerns deal with a delay in compliance deadlines to allow for the implementation of all of the long-term framework, and then also potential exemptions for multifamily residential and municipal buildings that were located in underserved communities. The legislation calls them, disadvantaged communities until there is a funding source. So our outreach efforts, of course, included conversations with the co-sponsors, both the Natural Resources Defense Council and Heal the Bay, who are the 2 sponsors currently. We met with NRDC staff to discuss the bill and amendments, facilitated a discussion between NRDC and the member agency non-functional work group. So the discussion regarding the anticipated amendments, what we found was actually it was very positive conversations, and we found that NRDC and the author had proposed amendments that incorporate much of ACWA, which is the Association of California Water Agencies, and Metropolitan's requested changes. Those amendments are not yet in print. They've been submitted to Ledge Council, and we anticipate that they're going to be out mid next week. So then we'll have a revisiting of the language there. So the next steps are really we're going to be taking this item to our board for their discussion and deliberation and direction, and then that determines what the next steps will be. We anticipate potentially meeting again with the non-functional turf work group with the member agencies to make sure that however the direction goes with the board, that we continue to stay in conversation with our member agencies to ensure their comfort level with the legislation as it moves forward. So that concludes my presentation on this item, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Lana, for that. You really enlightened me because I didn't know all the details as thorough as what you just mentioned. So with that, I'm going to open it up. Anybody have questions, comments, thoughts at this moment here in this room or online?
Yes, thank you, President Houston. And I know Lana did a great job of covering a lot of information in a short amount of time. In fact, I know I couldn't have done a job like that. And so I just want to make sure that our board kind of understands the underlying principle, because we've been promoting turf removal for years. And through your leadership, we've actually increased our investment in that We've had record-breaking numbers of applications. We've developed new programs to specifically target our local governments. And then, of course, we created a program that I'm not sure I've seen any other agency have, which is our Grass Replacement Plus program, which targets specific high-need communities as well as our disadvantaged communities in the West Basin service area. But this would prohibit the use of potable water in for non-functional turf within our CII communities, commercial, industrial, and institutional. And so you can imagine when you talk about commercial, there's some across the street. I look out my window every day and I see it there. And so that'd be a great example of that. And that would be prohibited in our service area if this legislation was to be passed. And the enforcement level of that is obviously a question. And Lana pointed out that the different timelines as far as the implementation of that, depending on the different sector and land use. But ultimately, that would be prohibited in the West Basin service area. And so I think that what stood out to me in the discussions, I had the opportunity to join the meeting with the NRDC as well as our water policy analyst, Matt Vey, was kind of the request from some of the smaller communities, the smaller metropolitan water district agencies saying, how are we going to enforce this? And I know the city of Fullerton was a really good example of voicing their concerns about they didn't express opposition to the concept, but the prohibition and how you would implement it and enforce that. And so I wanted to make sure that you were all aware of kind of the implications of that, because we obviously have diverse communities. We have a lot of different types of need within our CII sectors. And so if this legislation was to pass, that would be the ultimate end game would be over a course of time, they would implement that prohibition. So I just want to set that stage for us. And I know that both MODOC as well as the city of Long Beach are here in person, and they I think made great comments during that meeting with the NRDC. So
actually, you'll be in a moment because I have two people who already raised their hands here. So hold on one second. So I see Director Russ Lefebvre, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard several discussions about this non-functional turf issue. Very, very, very difficult problem. And I don't know exactly how we're all going to end up. But I do want to point out that Laura Friedman is a past Met director and has a very good understanding of water issues and especially Met perspectives on water issues. And I'm sure hoping we can come up with something. Thank you.
Good, thank you. And one more, Bilal, your hand's up.
Hi, good afternoon. Real quick, I don't know who would be able to answer this, but would you be able to confirm when West Basin will be relaxing the suggested water shortage or conservation level and how far that will be relaxed? And then I guess related to the water shortage contingency plan, like what would be the final level?
Yeah, that's a great question. EJ, would you like to answer that?
happy to do so. Next Thursday, I believe at 1 p.m., but it's on our website at www.westbasin.org. We'll be hosting our Water Policy and Legislation Committee. And at that time, we will have an action item discussing our water shortage contingency plan. It's worth noting that we are currently at a level 3 shortage. And so you'll see a board packet, I think, published hopefully tomorrow that'll contain that memo. Contemplating whether to move to a 0 or a level 1.
Mikey, when you get a chance.
I heard that part. Now, was there another part? Bilal, you had two things you said. One was the relaxing or what have you, our policy. And what was the other part of your question?
I think it was answered. It was just to see what would be the final level that you guys are planning to go to, but it sounds like it'll be 0 or 1.
Just want to make sure you got everything. So yes, so apparently more to come at that meeting next week. Okay.
Thank
Great,
you.
Thank you. Welcome. You, sir.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm Harvey Delatorre, the interim general manager at the Municipal Water District Orange County, or MODOC. actually a former employee of West Basin. It's good to be back here. Yes, I wanted to comment on this, and thank you, Lana. She really did a fabulous job. We've been looking at this in detail because it is something that our board and Orange County, as well as a lot of our retail agencies, are very concerned about. I will tell you that as the interim general manager, and I don't know if Greg has the same situation, but my hand gets tired of signing all the checks, dealing with how many turf removal things we do. We do a lot. The member agencies, in fact, even contribute to that. I believe I signed with turf removal and even drip irrigation programs close to $700,000 of rebates in one given month. So we care about turf removal. Yeah. However, the big point that I think is emphasized here that we have concerns with this bill is not only some of the concerns that Lana has listed out from the member agencies, but really it should be moved more toward a local decision-making process. I think you guys would respect that in the sense that these boards are made up to make local decisions. And we need to make sure that if a certain area or division chooses to go in that direction of doing more turf, that not only should it be incentivized, but also a replacement program in place. To simply ban it, especially in the areas of multifamily, has problems that Lana has already kind of illustrated. And to kind of move forward Metropolitan at this moment until all these amendments and feedback has been delivered, probably is not doing it proper justice. There is time to be able to do this. And I agree with EJ that what should happen is allow all these parties to get together to work with Metropolitan and hopefully with the author to amend these components. And so you can have a better bill that simply would allow for that. We can't get into all the concerns associated, but some of the major ones that we've seen, which is the multifamily that he's mentioned. We also have tree health. I mean, I was a planning commissioner for 10 years in the city of Santa Ana, and Santa Ana is in fact one of the pilot programs that Metropolitan is working with taking out turf removal in a lot of the medians. And I will tell you, cities is already having a hard time making sure that the trees remain healthy. That's not addressed in this bill. That needs to be looked upon and amended. There's also enforcement provisions. Who's going to enforce that housing? Those are things that need to be thought about beforehand. What is the definition of non-functional turf? How do those play into? Those things need to be looked at, and that's why the member agencies are simply saying, Metropolitan, you're not in the trenches dealing with this. The retail agencies are. So it'd probably be best on this. Come back and look at these, get better definitions, amend these things and see if the author is amendable to this. And then maybe we can see if Metropolitan should even take a support position on this. So I think there's a lot that needs to be. I think we're probably going a little too fast. And I would encourage that in fact, our member agencies have encouraged our Met directors to kind of tell Metropolitan to put a little pause, come back to the table, work with all the parties and get clarity on some of these issues through amendments. And then hopefully we can have a better product because they're not the ones that are going to be implemented on a daily basis. They're not going to be the ones in the trenches. It's going to be the retail agencies. And I think that should be clearly understood while we do. So I hope that these are not questions, but more comments, Mr. President. I hope that this helps.
I think it's very helpful, as a matter of fact, because even when I'm sitting here, one of my questions was, even in all of this, what's the practical implementation of this? Because like we literally are in a neighborhood of industrial. Most all of these buildings around us, it's all potable water. There's not a lot of recycled water in this area. There's parts of our service area that have no access to recycled water, as we all know. Like let's say the city of West Hollywood and others. So it sounds like to me, you're going to have some very dire consequences across the state if you put a one size fits all, solution to this.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly said.
You know what I mean?
And I would go even further from that to say that I know that NRDC and maybe some others may say, well, and you mentioned we have problems on the Colorado River, and Metropolitan took a very bold step in signing an MOU in it. But if you look at the MOU, it actually does say that Metropolitan would support, and commit to the development of programs and incentives, coordination with member agencies, and even draft model ordinances. But that was again more of an encouragement, more of incentive, not banning and going so far to that step. So again, one could argue that taking a co-sponsorship at this moment is probably not consistent with that. One would argue. I would probably take that take. I think it's more to not an incentive, but there's another piece to it. I think you're saying, Director Houston, which is where's that replacement? If you're going to do it, where's enforcement component of it. Don't let cities out there just do something and ban it and then simply say, well, you're on your own. What is that component? Because we all want to see not just saving water, but what is the beautification of that component as well? I hope that, again, that provides a little bit more clarity.
Really appreciate that. Let's see, other questions or comments? I don't see it this time, although I see Anatole moved up to the table, so. So you might want to say something. Go ahead.
Yes, I figured that was ultimately going to be invited to the table to speak. So now Long Beach is here.
Yes. Welcome.
So as staff for Long Beach, a retailer and a metropolitan member agency at the same time, I want to preface my comments that we have not taken a position on the bill, and we have not advised our director yet on the legislation itself. Having said that, though, I think in the presentation that you heard from Metropolitan and the comments from MODOT here today, as well as from your own staff, I want to leave you with perhaps 3 different aspects on how to view the issue at hand. So the first aspect of the issue was mentioned by Harvey as well, is that as a region and as metropolitan member agencies, we're placed in this situation different from the rest of the state because we're facing prospects on the Colorado River that have to do with curtailment of supply. And consequently, as metropolitan member agencies, and in fact, Long Beach did sign on to the letter of support that was circulated that identified non-functional turf as one of the commitments to have a different take on it, to have action on it. General terms. It is critical, though, in that strategic level, that as negotiations proceed on the river, and as we move towards resolution of issues on the river, that as an urban consumer of Colorado River water, we step forward and participate as urbans on the river, committing to certain things. And so in that sense, the aspect of non-functional turf has a strategic value for us in the region, different than perhaps some of the rest of the state. Same time, a second aspect of this is you've heard repeatedly, and we ourselves as retailers are dealing with this issue of what enforcement means. And that's because although we use non-functional turf as the issue, when we poke into the details of the language is the irrigation of that turf with potable water. That opens the door to a number of different variables, including irrigation of non-functional turf through recycled water, irrigation of non-functional turf through stormwater capture or rainfall diversion. That complicates the issue of enforcement and brings a difficulty because the mere aspect that you visually have non-functional turf is not a violation of the legislation or some of the enforcement mechanisms. What is a violation is that you actually get caught because you have an irrigation system that is somehow watering that non-functional turf, albeit with potable water. Because if it was rainfall diversion or recycled water,
Groundwater?
No, groundwater would be potable water.
Pulled into that too, right?
Well, now you're gonna throw another wrinkle.
Yeah.
So another wrinkle is if you have a raw water well.
Right.
That pumps non-potable water. Thank you, President Houston, for bringing a third
The
wrinkle.
whole mix and all that.
Well, no, in Long Beach, there are still some non-potable wells, right? These things exist throughout the region, right? I think the point of it, though, is that from retailers, when it comes to enforcement, then this aspect of how to enforce becomes a struggle. Because the irrigation is the enforcement, not the fact that the type of landscaping exists. To build also on Harvey's comments, the third piece is one that, as Long Beach being a large portion of our neighborhoods allow the city to qualify as a disadvantaged community, we have the issue of equity and access. Not everybody has access to recycled water. Not everybody has access to do the investments for stormwater capture. So then this aspect of what do you do instead of turf goes back to the comment that Harvey made as well. We have communities that lack access to green space already to begin with. And unless there is a comprehensive effort to identify alternatives for that green space that maintains the use has a function. Unless there's incentives and programs to make that happen, then we are inherently trying to deal with one issue and perhaps creating an equity and access issue on the third. So that's kind of like a three-part piece to discuss some of the difficulties of this issue. The legislation has good intentions for all the reasons that we identified, right? The question is, how does that legislation serve those purposes, but yet not create some of these other negative aspects?
Right. No, I thank you very much for your comments. Really. And this is kind of dialogue we all need to have and hear and understand. And that's why even as a neighboring agency, having you here and you all from Orange County coming up too, because we want to hear the different perspectives. That's the point of the meeting. So I have a couple final questions, comments, because I know we're pushing the clock a little, but anybody else with a question or comment first? I see EJ, go ahead.
I'll just really quickly, I wanted to brief you on our activity on this item. I did have the opportunity to speak with one of our Met directors.
You get it?
And I know.
Okay. Oh, you know what? Might be wine. Might have to
And I
sign for it.
I do know that our general manager, Greg Reed, has a meeting with our second Met director on Friday to discuss these items. This is obviously one of those. Secondly, West Basin has been participating along with Metropolitan Water District. As they mentioned, they have a working group. The MODOC has contacted us and we've offered to work with their working group as well. They're working on potential amendments that they could offer Metropolitan Water District as well as the author. So we want to work with them as far as where those amendments go. And even before that, it's important to note that West Basin did work with the Eastern Municipal Water District back in the summer of 2021 on this very issue, because West Basin has taken a very supportive approach to working with our communities to meet their needs and remove as much turf as possible. Perhaps there are alternative approaches to this that may not be a prohibition or a mandate, but incentivizing and working with our communities, because we know that in the West Basin service area, we have 17 municipalities and unincorporated areas that will feel very differently about a mandate or a prohibition on items like this. So I wanted you to know that we're very engaged at every level as far as working on potential solutions to this, and we'll continue to monitor this. And again, this will be brought up at the Water Policy and Legislation Committee next Thursday.
Okay, very good. I'm going to kind of wrap it up with a little rapid fire stuff really fast. So you answered one of my questions I had was how we've been involved with the working groups. The second is between Lana and which committee does this go to for next steps at this moment? Which committee at Met works on this?
President Houston, this is going to be heard in the Legislation, Regulatory Affairs and Communication Committee on Monday at about 1:30, I believe is the time it's scheduled.
Okay, great. And I will plead my ignorance. Are either of our directors on that committee or not? I don't know if our Met directors are on one of that.
Director Gray.
Gray's on that one? Okay, got it. So obviously you all be talking to Director Gray about some of the issues that have been brought up today. I think the last question, well, comment then question. Fire concerns, I think, are huge in all of this too, because if you don't have, if you can't water in certain areas. Yeah, hold on one second, Director Gray. If you can't water in certain areas, right, like in Palos Verdes, like in Malibu, you could be out in Corona. If you can't water in certain areas because of the type of water you have access to, then this is a huge concern, I would think. Imagine that's one of the other items in discussion. Director Gray, did you have a comment or question?
President, yeah.
Yes,
thank you.
go ahead.
I am on the line. I've heard the comments. I plan on meeting with our staff to discuss those comments we've heard today and the agency's perspective. So I look forward to meeting with our general manager and our assistant general manager. And I've heard the comments today. So I appreciate the comments from everyone today regarding this item. So thank you.
Great, excellent. And my last question is, what's the timeline of this bill? What are the next steps of this bill? Is it going to a committee anytime soon, or where is it at in the process?
I believe, Director Houston, that it has to go to two different committees. And are you talking
This AB 1572, I mean.
at the state level or at the Met level?
At the state level, sorry, state
Yeah.
level.
I believe it might have to go to two committees, but to my understanding, there is time. legislative process.
Right.
It's been a while since I was fluent in that, but I believe it has it all the way until early summer. I'm sorry, early summer timeframe.
The bill is in the front year of a 2-year legislative session. So ultimately you have 2 years to get it across the finish line. Obviously it'll have to pass out of the assembly before it can go to the Senate. I'll look up the committee information and I'll send that to the, because I don't know if it was dual referred or
Okay.
double referred. So we can check that for you. But obviously we have a considerable amount of time before it gets passed and signed. There's multiple opportunities for us to engage. Obviously, Metropolitan Water District will have the equal opportunity to engage, and we'll keep you informed. We'll have very specific information by the end of this meeting, but of course, we can highlight this again on Thursday next week.
Thank you very much. All right, with that, I know that I believe Lana has the last portion as well on our agenda. So let me just tell it publicly. It's 4C as in cat, modernization of water rights administration in California to enhance enforcement and protect supply reliability. So Lana, go ahead.
Thank you, President Houston. I'll try to make it quick. If you want me to hurry up, I'm happy to do that as well. So the reason,
Do your best.
okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So there was a legislative slate of bills introduced this session with the goal of improving the state's water rights system. But as drafted, the bills actually ended up creating a lack of certainty and actually bypassed the due process for water rights holders. The slate of bills as drafted right now create significant water supply impacts to Metropolitan and the region. So in conversations with our general manager, the approach that we decided to take was to adopt a package of policy principles that address and really state clearly what we support for water rights and the system. The system itself is fine. We see the problem as being one of enforcement. And so fundamentally, water rights are vested property rights for the ability to use water. And that certainty is needed for human and economic activity in a stable economy and human communities. So this kind of to maintain that certainty requires a stable and predictable process of administration. The challenges, though, is climate change is creating very volatile and intense weather events that demand quick responses by the state board, but they're struggling with the lack of staffing, tools, and funding, and modernization and additional support is needed to enable more nimble, effective enforcement of the water rights and provide a stronger deterrent to violations of water rights. So what is really at risk here? What are we talking about? So the Colorado River agreements, for starters, we're looking at 450,000 acre feet for Metropolitan San Diego County Water Authority. So these bills would create uncertainty for those Colorado River agreements. The Bay Delta regulatory stability would be destabilized, and that accounts for 30% of Metropolitan's annual supply. Existing supply programs and for example, water transfers and groundwater programs, that the parties in those partnerships do not have stable water supply reliability and assets to ensure Metropolitan's continued supply reliability, particularly during, times of drought. So, for example, we have the Lower Yuba River Accord. And since 2007, Metropolitan has secured over 250,000 acre feet of water through its partnership on the Lower Yuba River, a supplemental water program composed of more senior water rights, which has really been instrumental for us being able to manage through the recent droughts. Most recently in 2021, Metropolitan utilized its existing groundwater partnership with Arvin Edison to secure 38,000 acre feet of water. And that involved multiple parties, including senior water rights holders, like the Central Valley Project contractors that provided needed water supply to Metropolitan during what was a really critical water year. But not only does it affect our existing water rights, this also affects new water partnerships and the water transfer market. So the bills as drafted would create future uncertainty in water transfer markets, which are designed to solve supply shortages in light of climate change, including the viability of long-term water programs. So as a result, water users and entities would be disincentivized from advancing more creative partnerships such as multi-benefit initiatives, land repurposing, and/or flood and sustainable groundwater management solutions. And finally, what we see is a threat to infrastructure investments and regional economy impacts. The bills would create open-ended and ongoing risks to the ability to maintain and sustain economic health and stability for water rights holders, for communities, farms, tribes, and others, including the state water contractors, that have developed an urban and agricultural infrastructure and investments based upon the certainty of consistent and predictable water rights. So the proposed policy principles are actually very common sense and straightforward. So they support funding to enable the state board's effective enforcement of water rights. And that includes funding for staff and data modernization tools, including technical assistance. The bills would take away the adjudication or bypass the adjudication of water rights, but Metropolitan's policy principles support for and funding for the adjudication of water rights consistent with existing state law to ensure the due process rights and fair process for water rights holders, as opposed to regulatory reallocation. The policy principles also would support application of waste and unreasonable use doctrine on a case-by-case basis, as opposed to categorical applications of waste and unreasonable use doctrine. We support increases in civil penalties to deter violations of water policy. Additionally, we'd support protection of state water project releases from unlawful diversion to protect water quality in the Delta, as well as south of the Delta water rights holders and water users. We support improvements in existing law to authorize the Attorney General to seek injunctive relief in the case of violations. We also support the voluntary water transfers and exchanges and support the consolidated place of use of this state water project and the Central Valley project for improved flexibility. And finally, we would support flexible regulations to divert water while maintaining and protecting water rights, state water project supplies, and the environment. So this package will come to the board again at the, we're calling it the LRAC Committee, Legislation, Regulatory Affairs, and Communication, for their discussion. And then the following month, we would be bringing back the bills for discussion or potentially taking administrative positions on them, depending on what the general manager's direction would be on that. So that concludes this presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Lana. Again, excellent job running through that quickly. I guess just so I understand, so the policy principles are what's coming up to be discussed at MET, correct?
That is correct.
Wonderful. And I'm just going to ask if our staff, can you just provide me a hard copy of that instead of having to go look for it? That would be okay. I'd love to see those in writing. So thank you. They've already got agendized at MET. That'd be awesome. And then the other thing is this group of bills or what have you, Lana, is there one person or multiple people who have put this out, in the legislature or what?
So Assemblymember Bauer Cahan is actually the committee chair, and she's very interested in this topic. Metropolitan met with her at the beginning of March. There is actually bipartisan interest in this topic, and so it's an issue that I think deserves attention, and we're really interested in supporting the State Water Resources Control Board for better enforcement and administration.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, so with that, any questions from others or comments? Some very heady issues that they're looking at right now, so this is really good information for all of us. And I'm glad that people are also listening to us to give that feedback, and hopefully we'll be amenable to some of our concerns. So anybody else? I don't think so. Oh, I see EJ Caldwell.
I will just add to answer your question so everybody else can hear. It looks like that bill will be heard in Water Parks and Wildlife on April 18th.
April 8th.
So that would be the first hearing. If it passes out there, it was not double referred. So if it does pass out of there, it would move to the assembly floor.
Which bill is this? The
1572.
AB 1572. So April 18th, it'll be in which committee again?
Well, Assembly, Water Parks and Wildlife.
Got it. And obviously you'll provide an update to us after the fact when that happens. Right. I don't see anybody else who's interested in saying anything. So I want to say this has been a really good discussion, and I think it's been very beneficial. And do appreciate everyone who is physically here or watching us online. And thank you, Lana, as well, for your good reports. And all the staff who worked on this. So with that, our last item is director's comments or future agenda items. Do any of my colleagues have any comments at this time?
Oh, I just like to,
Williams.
yes, thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Oh, I would just like to say that this meeting, the discussion that we've had in the participation from the audience is the best I've seen in some time. And this is what I'd like to see at all of our meetings that are part of the what do we call this, our caucus with Met, that this is the opportunity for folks to come forward and give their opinion. So I want to thank you for being here, Long Beach and
Orange County.
Orange County, being here. And it's been a great discussion, and hope to see you back soon.
Much so. Thank you, Director Williams. Director Deere.
I agree with Director Williams.
Very good. Thank you. Director Gray. Gray. I don't know if we'll get her, but I will echo the same sentiments. And what I was also going to say too is those who weren't here, it is what it is. They missed out. I think this was really excellent. It will be on tape. They can watch it later. But I know we've been trying to get better engagement as we're coming back into real life. And so I have noted who I see and not see showing up. And so I really would like to ask our staff. Most of our retailers are not here. Most of our city people we sell water to are not here. I have no reason to know why, but I would like to see us try to have better engagement with everybody like we used to. Or do we need to look at how we schedule the meeting? Because this is the purpose of it, is to have good dialogue. And so I do thank our friends from both Long Beach and Orange County for coming all the way up here. But I'd really like to see us get some better participation at these meetings, because that's our time to talk in an open forum. So anyway, with that, I'm glad everybody who made it is here. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.